18-point font now.
That's
It's
smart,
like-
that's
It's
smart
like
business.
they know they know that the average.
All right, I think we're ready to go. We have oh, no, we're missing.
We're missing two. Maury, and who's the other one we're missing?
Well, Peter said he.
Peter
can't-
wasn't coming, that's right.
Peter
Okay.
can't come, I don't know about Maureen.
Maury said he
Maury
wasn't, he
said
would
he
be
was
here.
But Maury's regularly late.
But
Okay,
we're starting late.
so then
Well,
we
we
need
should
to
have been on
go ahead. So,
Can't find a parking spot.
Greg, are you doing the Zoom?
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you. So, does anybody know, have the lowdown on the, nor'easter for tomorrow?
Just rain.
Rain, right? That's it.
For us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
It's only
fine.
John.
Yeah, farther west. it's going to be a little more.
For above 1,000 feet.
I don't think we need water.
The blue light's not on, right?
You can make a call and make sure it is.
At least I got my parking spot, John.
We can start without Maury, I think.
think we should call your respective words to order and then get on with it.
Okay. I'll call the finance committee meeting to order at 7:35 PM. And I don't know who's taking minutes.
I'm here.
Okay, so from the finance committee,
Thank you, Dale.
we have Mike Pratt, Andy, Dean, Tom Parkins, myself. We're expecting Maury, but he's not here yet.
Recording in progress. Here we go. All right, I'd like to bring to order the Manchester Select Board meeting, December 15th, roll call vote. Brian Solacey.
Here.
Kathy Bellata. Here. John Round.
Here.
Ann Harrison. Here. Becky Jakes is here. There we go. Yeah.
And Gail Maury just walked in.
Thank you.
Just get into it.
Oh, wow.
They've got much better than we do.
Yeah.
Who brought those?
Yeah.
Sure, I'll take one. Anybody want one? Lauren? Did you-
That means it's gonna be a difficult budget discussion.
Yeah, a long one.
That's a serious Bud Browning.
Oh, no.
Thank you.
Thank
thought it was-
you.
It should make, I don't eat chocolate, so when you make something chocolate.
Oh,
Oh, my God.
Yeah, too much
Thank
chocolate.
Mm.
That's
Chocolate doesn't like me, because doesn't sit well with it.
Those are delicious.
They're delicious.
Thank you.
They're small.
Yeah, take two small.
Mhm.
Right.
This is the best meeting ever.
All right,
Let's do
so
that.
if you can chew and listen at the same time, we'll get on with it. So hopefully everyone knows everybody, their newest member.
Tom Parkins.
Tom Parkins. Yeah, stepping up and welcome to so tonight is sort of marks the, I guess I'll call it the halfway mark of the budget process. For the last couple of months, department heads have been busy preparing their proposals and then having those reviewed by me and Andrew in particular, and then a couple of you have sat in on some of the larger budgets to help get to this preliminary stage. So this marks the presentation of a preliminary budget to you. It's a work in progress over the course of the next couple of months, January and February principally. We'll be working with all of you to fine tune it and to and craft the final budget proposal that then gets presented to the voters at the annual town meeting. So there'll be lots of time for input from you individually and from the public in general over the course of the next 10, 12 weeks to finalize this budget. So again, I want to thank the department heads for all the good work that they've done so far. Special thanks to Andrea Mainville, town accountant, who has worked very hard to put the book together and is really our front person on working the online software system that we have. The booklet will be available online through a portal so that anyone in the public can review the materials, and you can as well. So I'll give you those links that you can use. And there'll be a link on the town website for folks that they can click on as well to dive into this. It's a thick book. It's over 200 pages long, so there's a lot of information, a lot of detail. We're not going to go over every page tonight. I'll let you read through it at your leisure over the course of the next few weeks. But I do want to spend just a little bit of time highlighting a few things, as is our tradition, and spend most of the time really talking about sort of the three big issues that are before us as we finalize this budget. So just again, just to emphasize, we do have the ClearGov budgeting software that we started last year. Again, utilizing that again this year, and it makes it much easier for department heads to input their data as well as for us to review it, and makes it easily available to the public. So we'll continue to use that and fine tune it as we use it year after year. I'd like to start off with sort of the big picture. What's the 60,000 foot view, if you will, in terms of the budget. And so as a preliminary budget, it stands at a $40.5 million total expenditure. That's all inclusive. Schools to enterprise funds to community preservation funds. And so you see here a breakdown of what comprises that 40.5. Half of that is the regional school district and the vocational school district. It's the biggest slice of the pie. And then town operations, capital expenditures are up significantly in this proposed budget. Tapping into our reserve funds to continue a pretty aggressive effort to catch up on a lot of deferred capital. We'll get into that as we go along. Debt payments and capital exclusions, the enterprise funds, that's the water and sewer, meaning that they are not funded by taxes, but are funded by the fees that we charge for those two services. Your community preservation projects, that's a surcharge on the tax rate that pays for that, and then some state matching funds that comes in. And then there are various state assessments that we're obligated to pay. And then we have what's called the OPEB, or other post-employment benefits, essentially retiree health insurance, a liability that we are putting money aside so that we close out that liability in another 10 years or so. Tax abatements. We set aside dollars each year for potential abatements to property taxes that are appealed. So overall, a $40.5 million budget. A lot of assumptions that are behind those numbers, and we'll get into some of those. I'm not going to go into this very busy slide, but I do like to just remind people, just give them a sense of some of the various services that 40 million is purchasing. I don't have stats on the school side, this is town side. But obviously a lot of different aspects of municipal services, from water and sewer to plowing roads to trash collection, tax bills that are issued and collected, excise taxes, et cetera, et cetera. Van rides for seniors, books taken out at the library, videos, park and rec programming. So there's really a wide array of services that we're providing through the municipality. And this just gives you a flavor of what some of those, what those services look like. So like I say, every budget is based on a number of assumptions and various goals. So a primary assumption is that the citizens want the services that they're currently getting. So this budget assumes basically level delivery of those services. We make the assumption that taxpayers are willing to have their taxes go up 2.5% in order to pay for the continuation of those services. Another assumption is that we level fund exclusion. So we have your debt exclusions for capital. We also have annual capital exclusions. And what we have been doing over the last several years is as debt is retired, we replace it with a similar amount of capital exclusion so that the total amount of exclusion remains the same. So that keeps the tax level in terms of the exclusions. Well, that's the good news. That is that we're not dropping taxes as that debt is retired because we're repurposing those dollars to help pay for capital. But that has been effective for us in terms of putting more money into capital and catching up on that deferred capital that we have. Which is my next line about continuing that aggressive funding. This FY24 budget does assume some additional funding from different grants. We have some remaining ARPA money. You remember, John received about $2 million in ARPA money. And that is being spent. The remainder of that will be spent in this budget. So some of the goals that we hope to achieve is adjusting to some higher demands that we're seeing in some of the departments, particularly in public safety. And we'll spend a good chunk of our time talking about that over the next few months. We will be mapping out long-term facility needs and talk about some projections over the 20 years for what those facility needs might look like and some dollar assignments to those needs. And of course, we want to continue to maintain our strong fiscal condition. And the town does remain in good fiscal shape. Our fund balance is healthy, growing AAA rating, and we continue to do that. And this budget assumes that we continue along those same lines as well.
Greg, can I ask a question about a couple of things on this slide?
Yeah.
So assumptions, it's great that we have assumptions and that the budget is based on these assumptions. My question is, how do we validate some of these assumptions? Specifically the top two.
So I think the best validation of that is what voters decide at town meeting. So they ultimately make that choice. And the other validation is through citizen response to the services that we provide.
Okay. So on what I'm poking at really is in any service organization, when you have a lot of services, there are typically some that are underutilized. I equate it to cleaning out the closet. You know, if you ever go into your closet once a year and clean stuff out, there's always something at the back. You're like, oh man, I forgot that I had that, you know? And running a service organization has similar challenges. There's always something somewhere that, I'll just use the phrase underutilized, that I guess I wouldn't assume that if we brought it forward to the citizens, they might not agree to do something different. And so I just am not sure where we're having those conversations, if it's in some of the, workshops and, do I need to start attending? If I want more detail, is that where I should attend? So, service organizations, they gather clutter over time. And so I'm just trying to understand how we.
So I think our frontline
Attack that.
assessment takes place with these two boards. So that's really, not that we wouldn't listen to citizens, but the finance committee and the select board really are the leaders of that assessment.
And just the reason why I'm poking at it is, I do think this is a bit of a different year because of the unusually high inflation rate. We haven't seen inflation rates like that in quite a long time, so I'm not 100% comfortable with just using the assumptions, from last year. So that's what and I'm new to the process right here, so I'm just trying to poke at. Should we look at some things a little bit differently, due to the macroeconomic situation we're all in?
Right, I mean, clearly we are in an uncertain period right now.
Yeah.
We are experiencing high inflation. We don't know where that's gonna go next. Is that gonna continue? Are we gonna drop into a recession? There's a lot of speculation and a lot of unknowns there. Well, I agree with you that this is a time for probably extra scrutiny.
I might follow up on Kathy's comment there. We don't proactively ask a lot of questions. We move it along and we see that people are satisfied. I would say a lot of the things that are on the agenda tonight, we're gonna find out in April, whether people are okay with whatever these decisions are, because we've got some perhaps difficult decisions to make, and we'll find out what people have to think. But I think for a lot of those questions, we're just, hey, things are going along pretty well, so people must be happy. But until you take something away, you don't know. And so we'll see.
I just add one on top of those two. I'm actually personally fine with the number one assumption that citizens want the current level of services. I think that's a reasonable assumption. Obviously, we'll find out for sure. Yeah. But again, keeping it 30,000 foot, I just have a bit of a tough time reconciling that with, I'm gonna call it the higher requests from some departments. Do you know what I mean? In other words, if everybody's happy with the current level of services, then it doesn't make sense to me that certain departments should have these huge additional requests, right? Just to maintain the current level of service.
Right, so I
You see what I'm
think,
saying?
yes, I hear what you're saying. I think the debate we will have is whether those departments can continue to provide the same level of services at the same staffing that they have. That's going to be the question,
Sure, fair enough.
based on what they perceive as higher demand for one reason or another.
Okay,
So but yes, that's the discussion we need to have,
sure.
for sure.
One other thought, and again, I think it just looks back at the pattern of the last number of years. We spend a lot of time going through all of this, a lot of time, and a lot of soul searching about, do people want this? Do people want that? And then I'm always blown away at town meeting that we will go through a $40 million budget in about 17 minutes. Boom, just gone. And everybody says, well, you already looked at it. I guess that's good enough. Let's get the dogs on the beach or something else. So expectations that we get a lot of feedback at town meeting. I don't know, we always talk about it, but it doesn't always happen.
So, and that's not unusual to Manchester, exact same conversations in the town I used to live in, exact same conversations, but I just think. Once again, we haven't seen these levels of inflation in quite a long, so I just try to be a little proactive and having maybe some different conversations. And when we go through the rest of your presentation, Greg, I think my key feedbacks, I actually went through all these pages in the past 3 hours. What we tell here in this book is a spending story. We need to tell a financial story. And I think your team is doing a lot of good work generating savings by making some decisions, okay? And we're not reflecting that at all in this documentation. So I think we can talk more about that as we go through the process, but we need to tell an entire financial story, not just a spending story, because then people will think that's all we do. And I do think your team is finding ways to save money in some areas that can offset increases in other areas, but you have to work really hard to see that.
That's a great point. I mean, if only to, show proper credit where credit's due, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, even like a simple financial waterfall chart. I mean, it's a great visual that shows, last year's budget was this, you got your puts and takes, and this is how we got to FY24. It's a really simple visual that allows you to take credit for the savings that you your team has generated some decisions this board has made, has generated savings, significant savings for the town, and I don't see that in here, and I want to see that in here. You know, I think we owe it to, you know, all the people who are working hard on some of those projects to reflect the,
That's
you
a
know,
good point.
the hard work that they're
Absolutely.
doing.
And you wanted to say something?
I wanted to say the fact that they passed our budgets in 17.5 minutes is feedback. And it underscores both of the top assumptions. Right. It's not just that they're confident in us. They look at it and say, yes, that's what I want.
Mhm.
Yeah, and to that point, people that show up to town meeting are informed.
Say that again.
To that point, the people that do show up to town meeting are the ones that are involved. How's that? Informed.
The 17 minutes correlates to bullet point number 2, in my opinion. In other words, if it went over 2.5, it wouldn't go down in 17 minutes.
Well, last year we went over 2.5 and there were no problems. We were 3.2% last year.
There was no override. So
Right.
that's
I guess.
really what I'm pushing on. We hear language, so some of us attended the school committee meeting last night, right? We hear language about overrides, which I don't like that language coming from another organization, presuming that any town should have an override. So I have a fundamental problem with that conversation. But if we are anticipating some very large expenses, which we are, right? It can help us over time to get ahead of that by trying to generate as many savings as we can now to build that, you know, reserve bucket for the things we're going to need over time, right? So when you're in a good financial position, now's the time to look even harder to generate some savings so that we can continue to maintain. And I'm not saying change the service levels. I'm saying deliver them differently, right? And those are the conversations I hope we have over the next couple of months, because it is going to be really tough.
I think the other thing we need to remember is we do have 3.5% in excess levy capacity
Understand?
in 2 years. So
Yeah.
Increase the taxes.
I second the comment. I don't think the word override should be used towards the top, right? Like, I mean, we have many different levers that we could pull, and I'm not suggesting we would or should pull any of those different levers, but to me, it's more, they have a dollar request, and then it's up to us, right, to figure out how to. Like, if, for example, your slide before mentioned 4.6 million in capital, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a big number, that's 1.6 higher than we normally, I mean, just to pick one example, we could cut that to 4 million, you know what I mean? If that extra 6 went, you know, I'm not saying that's what we would do, I'm just saying that's one of many levers, that's all.
That number is larger based on dipping into reserve, so it's not a steady stream of revenue. But I understand your point.
I'm coming at the point of the word override, and it's
Yeah.
just more that we have all these levers that we can use, and, you know.
So how we talk about things as we're, because this is all preliminary and we're just getting started, I think what we're saying is, let's not presume an end state until we get to that end state. Let's, you know, look at the facts, go through the process, but, you know, try to keep our language neutral so that we can pull whatever lever we feel we need to get to a good end state for the town.
What do you mean when you say keep it neutral?
So,
Wording neutral.
for example, the mention of the word override, that's an
Mhm.
example of not being neutral. It's presuming that this town or any other town would have to have a proposition 2.5 override in order to fund certain things. And I don't think that's
But is it presuming or just, I mean,
it's,
I don't-
I think the first step is to come up with the needed expenditure.
right,
And then you figure out how you're gonna fund those expenditures.
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And one of the funding mechanisms, though, can also be delivering the service differently
Mhm.
at a reduced cost from the way you're doing it today. Because I think where people get confused is level services does not mean you spend the exact same dollar amount
On
you know,
exactly the same
or
things,
even
right.
increasing it because you can deliver services differently and do it less expensively and have the same level or greater level of service. So I just want to make sure we're having, you know, the team, Greg, is having those conversations about how to innovate and deliver some of the services differently, give the residents the same or better service, but at potentially a reduced cost.
And I think we do try to discuss that in FinCom meetings.
Right, and it's just, like I said, that's not coming across in the documentation, so I'm wondering where I can get.
It's in the FinCom meetings where we go into all the
So that's
detail.
where I should be attending.
Yeah, that's when we dive into the individual budgets and question things. This is just an overview.
Go ahead with the.
Yep.
Go ahead and actually call up now. Let's see what.
We have a lot of time in front of us. Huh?
So, this was putting up the 5 major goals that the select board have been working on and will continue to work on. So it's helpful to have those goals in mind as we look at the budget, to make sure that we're supporting the goals. So, more discussion to cover on those goals as well. So the basic challenges that I'm seeing front and center will be what's the right size for staffing and services for public safety. So, all 3 departments, police, fire, and harbor. Police and fire are the larger 2. Harbor is a much smaller department. 3 comprise our public safety operations. And they, as I indicated earlier, for all 3, would like to increase their staffing. So that is a sort of front and center discussion that we'll need to have, and some decisions will be needed. The capital needs again remain a large challenge for us as we look long-term in particular. We're exceeding our goal of the 3 million, which was the target we established a few years ago. We're able to do that because of, again, that strategy of as debt retires, replacing it with exclusion money, capital exclusion money. But we've also been putting more dollars, general tax dollars into the capital line, as well as dollars from our enterprises. So both water and sewer contributing more to capital than we have in the past.
Quick question on that. It's the one and only blank I see here, the actual for the capital. Is that? Curious. You know, on
What are
this-
you talking about, Mike?
Page 21, the balanced budget summary, you know, it shows budgeted and actual for the past couple of years, and the only blanks is on the capital improvement. Not the budgeted, but the actual. So
This is the operating budget.
but there's a row for capital
Right,
improvement.
right.
I mean,
Yeah, probably because
Oh, I see,
the actual spend is a timing issue, so it's a tough number.
so I would argue there's 2 numbers then, right? You would show, in my opinion, you'd show actual cash
Yep.
out the door.
Yep.
And then you'd have another number that would be
What's been committed but not spent.
correct
Yeah,
due to the time.
yeah, we can show this.
Okay.
You had indicated that it was gonna be a little bit over what was budgeted, though, right?
Yeah, same or exceeding.
The other thing that would be really helpful in this is to let us know what the expected reserves are after this is spent,
Yeah, this,
because the reserves page doesn't show that. There's estimated fiscal year 23, but it is no estimate for fiscal year 24.
yeah. So, back to the capital needs in terms of, so the year-to-year capital, we're doing well, and that, with the continuing, it's the big ticket items that the challenge to respond to. The Essex Elementary School, for example, at one point there was hope that we could wait until the high school was paid off. And then we could substitute that debt for the Essex Elementary. There's real pressure to move that forward, do it sooner. in the next 4 or 5 years. So that's a big ticket item that will be a challenge to absorb. Some of the bigger ticket items on the town side, for example, the DPW facility, whether we upgrade what we have at the Pleasant Street site or build new, either there or some other site. In a couple years, we'll have retired some additional debt. And if, assuming that the new research lab CST goes forward, that would bring in a significant new revenue stream that could, in theory, help pay for such a facility. And then looking further out, if you can, and this is the timing issue, if we can wait on some of these bigger ticket items until the 33, 34 timeframe, 10 years from now, 8, 10 years from now, we will have fully funded our retiree liabilities, both on the pension and the health insurance. And that frees up significant money to the tune of close to $2 million a year. So timing is a major factor here in terms of how we can respond to and handle some of these big ticket items. So that is obviously a continuing discussion that we have every year. And has been alluded to already, school district challenges, both on capital and operating. And they, in recent years, they have been relying on reserves to fund operating. That is not a sustainable model. And so the question becomes, I have the word override in there.
That's an example of the non-neutral language that I would like to no longer see, because it just perpetuates a conversation we don't need to have.
So, likely request for a significant higher increase than
There
we
you
have
go.
seen in the last few years.
Yep.
And so that presents a real challenge. So the preliminary budget does not show that higher increase. It shows the standard, roughly it's been the 3.5% annual increase because of the enrollment pattern changing. Currently with Essex's enrollment relative to ours increasing. That 3.5 really translates to another 2.5% increase for us, which it did last year.
When I look at the preliminary school budget, if you take the increase in operating and deduct the decrease in debt, the total increase for Manchester is only 3.31% of the 2023 budget.
If you subtract out the debt payment.
The decrease,
Yeah,
the decrease.
Basically,
decrease
if you
in
put
debt.
that debt payment into operating,
Yeah.
it comes close to covering.
I'm
what's
saying
being
that
requested.
the increase we have to pay only comes in at 3.31%. According to what is here. So it's not that much higher. The operating's 4 point, the Manchester,
You're looking at their request, or you're looking at,
I'm looking at their tentative budget summary.
Yeah.
Manchester, the operating was up 5.35, but the capital was down 7.4. And if you add the numbers together and divide it by the fiscal year 23 budget, the net increase for Manchester is only 3.31%.
well, if you net that out. Yeah.
So that's not asking for a lot more is what I'm saying, than normal.
But if you shift, again, if you take what was debt dollars and put it into operating, then you can,
But it's our outlay, it's what we have to
At the
pay.
end of the day, at the end of the day, they're coming up with cash requests, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, they're coming with a total dollar request, and if Sarah's numbers are right, I mean, cash is cash, so you can put all that together, and sounds like Sarah's saying it's an increase of 3.3%.
So the net is not as big as the request, because we have something to net it out. is what you're
Right.
saying.
Right.
so the challenge that is part of that equation, and again, we're getting into the weeds a bit here, is that debt payment was an excluded debt payment. So as that debt drops, the amount that's excludable drops, and our taxation ability drops. So we just have to
Okay,
factor that
okay,
in.
yep,
So it's not a straight net.
It's not a, right,
okay.
it's not it's hard to go 1-to-1.
Different color of money.
So again, this is just a high level view of new revenues that are anticipated in order to balance the preliminary budget. So it does assume that 2.5% increase in taxes, just under 700,000. It does assume new growth, new construction, about $20 million worth of new growth, which has been our average over the last few years. So that brings in $200,000 in new taxation. A very small increase on local receipts. We have some room there that if we needed to. So our local receipts at a base level 2.6, that is below what we have actually brought in over the last few years. That actual number is closer to 3 million.
And where's the ARPA money?
The ARPA money I don't show you. So it's sort of a side note on the capital. I don't show it in either the expenses. I don't show it as an expense and I don't show it as a revenue.
So just for example, on the local receipt, right? There's 400 grand. Roughly, right?
Yes.
Because last year's actual was 3 million,
Yeah.
using 2/6.
Yeah.
So even if you cut it in half, right? Like you didn't want to go for the full 400.
Right.
I mean, there's an easy 200.
There is.
So I'm just saying, in the context of the school request, if they were asking for, an extra 200, it's there.
It's there.
It's not even hard.
Right, but there are other requests that'll be coming in that we'll need to balance.
Sure.
So this preliminary budget assumes a 2.5% increase on wages. So the new contracts are still underway. And again, the discussions about staffing levels in public safety.
I think the question is, we know we have a lot of opportunity for spending. People are coming at us and asking for our money. And like you said, we've got contracts to negotiate. The estimating that we're doing on the growth and the receipts, are we being too conservative? What's the wiggle room in those numbers? Because, obviously you want to, your estimates are never going to be 100%, but are we being overly conservative in the estimating?
Well, I think
So it's been a perennial discussion.
we've been increasing
that
it
we've
every
had.
year.
We've been
Okay.
rationing that.
We've been inching it up,
Yeah.
probably slower than what many around the table feel we should do.
Well, given the current climate, I think we'd want to stay as conservative as we can.
Well, so you never want to be over budget, okay, but you never want to be too far under budget either, because that erodes the confidence in the overall budgeting process. If you come in too far under budget, there's like a wiggle room there, a range, right? You want to be in.
I think one
I'm
of
sure
the,
the finance people can articulate what that range should be.
So the target is
5%?
10% for the fund
That's
balance.
kind of,
And for the last number of years, we've been over that target. We've been up as high as 15%, 16%.
so that's what I was gonna ask, actually, was one of the charts that was in here. There was a nice trend chart and I didn't see a target, so I didn't know what good looked like. So are you saying that for your estimates, plus or minus 10% is what you're targeting for your reserve or your, okay,
Yes.
and we've been,
And you've got to
Better than
understand,
that,
before
right.
that chart started,
right,
we were down at 5%, right, Maury? I think when I came onto the FinCom, we were at 5% reserves or something like that. So
okay,
we made a
So-
considered
right,
effort to increase them.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about,
then it went too high.
so what I'm really talking about is when you're doing your estimating, when you have an estimate, because that's what these are. What does good look like? How close do you want to be when we take a look at the numbers next year at the end? How close do we want to be to what we actually spent? What does good look like? I guess I'm asking the financial folks. Yeah.
But we actually just go through the presentation and then rather than just, and
Sure.
if we can submit questions.
But we can get to it. This, I don't have too many more slides. This, we'll get through this one. So, just over 2 million in monies to put towards expenses, higher expenses. So where would that, how would that 2 million get spent? So obviously the big outlier here is the capital. And that is drawing primarily from the reserve fund. This allows such a large capital. The only reason why it's so big this year is in order to keep moving on some water pipe replacement projects. And inflation has hit those projects pretty hard. And so in order to keep making that progress, we're recommending a pretty big drawdown on the reserve for this one time. It will slow down in the years ahead, but to get us over this one hump, we're recommending this bigger drawdown.
So I presume when we meet with DPW, they'll be giving us exactly which projects
Yes.
we're intending to do to get to that money.
I'm, the 3.4, I'm trying to reconcile that with, I thought it was 4.6 on one of the early slides.
This is the base. This is what it was this current year.
Got it, I added.
And then I'm
I did
adding
3.4
1.2
Got it,
and I've
got
got
it.
that 4.6. Yeah.
Ray, can I just ask a question? The Central Street Dam. Seems like that's got a timeline that we may not be in control of, and grant funding, is that figured into this, or what's your thought process on that? Because my recollection is that could be a big delta here.
Yeah, it could be. So, short version is that we're about halfway there with the grants. We have a couple more that we're waiting for. And hopefully we'll know in another month or maybe 8 weeks. And it realistically won't start construction until the fall of 24. So it'll hit the FY25 budget if we are short.
So we may be able to ride through it this year.
Yes. So you can see, salaries, health, pension, basically, staffing costs. The three on, if you exclude the capital in the town side. And then the school district, I'm again showing that smaller request at that 2.5% for us, 3.5% overall. So that's where that 2 million would go. How would give you that?
Is the title on that said for 2022?
Nope, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah, should be
yeah,
24.
24. Yeah.
Start all over again.
So the key changes in the proposed budget, like I say, most services and staffing remain at the current levels. Again, there's 3 possible exceptions that we will be talking about. Our recent trends in not having high health insurance costs is going out the window this year. Medical trends are in the 8 to 12% range. We seem to be doing pretty well. Our current spend rate has been lower than those trends, so I'm hoping that we will get by with an 8% increase in health insurance costs on the premiums. We have a definitive number on pension for next year, and that's increasing 4%. Obviously, energy costs are a bit of a wild card. Supply costs certainly have gone up as well, particularly for DPW. Chemicals, water and sewer have gone up significantly. You'll see that in the water and sewer budgets. And then obviously, as I mentioned, the capital expenditure is a major change from the current year.
That 8% on health insurance, that ties on the previous slide, I think it was like 106,000.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess my point is like, it's good to look at both percentage and absolute dollars, right? Like you see 8% and you're like, holy cow, 8%, but then it's 106 grand, which within the context of a $40 million budget
Right.
is, yeah.
Yeah, good to put it in perspective. Yeah,
Right, that's-
absolutely. Absolutely.
This may be just past, but I thought the pension fund required a 7% increase.
That was the projections year over year.
Yeah.
I was surprised that we came in lower this year. I haven't gotten to the bottom as to why. I'm almost afraid to poke too hard, but anyways, it's a complicated formula in terms of our percentage of the grand total.
Okay,
So if other communities have grown their salaries more,
okay,
then we will benefit from it because we're a smaller percent of the total. So that might be what's at play here.
just because even though it's ancient history, I remember in the 2000 market crash, our estimated date for fully funding the pensions went from 28 to 34.
Yes, that's correct.
And-
Good memory. Yes,
So,
But the state's already given us this number for this year. Is what he said.
Right.
So this is definite for this.
definite for this year, but yeah, it's just one of the.
yeah, I'm not gonna guarantee you that 4% next year.
But one of the things I think to point out on the pension side is, and I recall this from every year meeting, can't remember his name, the guy from Wakefield, the external audit firm that comes in. He always points out,
Okay.
like,
Sure.
in terms of percentage, obviously, we're not 100% fully funded, but we are like in the upper, I don't know, 5-10% of.
For OPEB, most definitely.
Mhm.
Our pension is, we're part of the county system. They're doing fine. They're not top of the line and they're not at the bottom of the heap.
Okay, I'm probably mixing up.
But OPEB, yeah, we are definitely unusual in how far along we are
Yeah,
in our OPEB. And that was, the town made that decision quite a few years ago to start that, and that was a wise decision. So we will benefit from the decision for sure. I think I've talked through this already, about the capital plan and talked about early 30s when we free up dollars, and the real challenge is figuring out how we can time our projects with when we expect those revenues to be available. In order to avoid large new debt exclusions that basically result into a pretty large tax increase.
I'm confused as to how you're saying you're dipping further into reserves when the estimated reserves at the end of fiscal year 23 are 9.2%. Are you going lower than that?
For 24, we would dip lower than.
Lower than 9.2, so it'll go considerably under our target?
Well,
No, can I speak? Can you hear me? This is Andrea. Can you hear me? I just want to say the chart on there for the reserve fund for the 9.2%, I'm actually taking out what is being spent from reserves for this budget
Okay,
for FY23. So
that
that'll
is-
be like our starting balance for FY24. So it's already included in there.
okay,
Does that make
thank you.
sense?
Yeah,
Yep.
it does. Yeah,
That's
it
what I
does
was
make sense.
wondering. Okay,
Yes. Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, that's helpful.
I don't follow, sorry. What?
So on page 23,
Yep.
the
The 9.2.
9.2 already takes into account that larger drawdown in 24.
Got it. That's assuming pulling,
Yes.
yeah, gotcha,
Okay.
okay. Got it.
Good, makes me feel better.
Thank you, Adam. Please jump in at any time to help us out.
I'm just glad you can hear me. I've been having tech problems tonight, so I'm glad.
Yeah, no, you're coming through fine.
Okay, good.
So we will spend a fair amount of time on capital as we go forward. So just, again, I just like to include this to say, what does this all mean for homeowner? So I have both the mean and the median, pretty big difference in the two, from the value, using our current tax rate, 1043, which just got approved next week from the state. So, the person who has an average house of 1.4 million. We're paying around just over 14,000. 2.5% increase is another $360 that they need to pay. If you're in the median at that middle point, it's over 900,000 of a home value. We're paying 9,500 and a $240 increase. And then below, I just put down averages statewide. And how it compares to what we're paying. Again, it's just a little bit of a touching base of how we compare and what these dollars mean to a homeowner. So going forward, what the key decisions, we've talked about this, I've got that override in there. And,
Learn fast, though.
staffing for the public safety, we'll have union negotiations that hopefully will give us a better sense in another couple months. So we may need to do some adjusting there. And then what decisions are made for the school district going forward.
What, so Greg, what about, because you mentioned capital is what we're gonna be spending a lot of time talking about. The facilities master plan, will we see that, a draft of that before we complete this year's budget cycle?
It's gonna be tight. It's gonna be tight.
Because it's hard to have those conversations on big ticket items without that. At least a draft plan, even if it's not perfect.
We definitely need to review the draft before it's finalized.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We'll certainly have more information than we do have now. It's gotten off to a slow start, so we need to kind of move that along.
Well, what's the timeline on the union negotiation wages?
I always like to have it done by,
I know you don't know exactly, but
so it just depends.
but that's kind of tight with regard to the due date here.
Yes.
Okay, of all of these, it's the tightest.
Yes.
Because it's also the biggest variable, I suppose, in terms of controlling that timeline.
So, budgets are about choices, what we want to provide and so what services, what's the appropriate size of staffing and departments, what are the best delivery models of those services? Are there different models that we should be pursuing, whether they be in-house on our own, shared services with neighbors? Or again, as Kathy indicated, is there something in that closet that we're not using, but that doesn't have a high value, but we continue to provide? And then what about the funding sources? So what kind of commercial growth do we want, if any? I should have taken out that tax. We do have the room tax coming in. That's a new one that's starting. I need to take that out. It's no longer new.
When,
It just started last month.
literally last month.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to even ask, what is it?
It's just really hard to predict. We don't have a good sense of how many medium-term rental, short,
But
medium term.
what are we using for an estimate? Somehow, some way, are using some number or not? Did we estimate zero? And just,
Yeah, I don't, we haven't even put it in the estimated receipts yet.
okay,
Is it 20,000? Is it 100,000? It's really hard to tell.
How much is the tax gonna be?
It's I think it's 3.5, 3 or 3.5%.
It's paid by the fish.
so we get the money from like Airbnb
Yep.
or
Yeah. But it's the state
Yeah,
that collects it.
The state collects it and then they cut us a check. So it's really hands off for us.
and we'll get
That's-
them once a month.
Once a quarter,
The first check will come in, so
probably February. So next steps here.
Middle June.
As I say, this is sort of midpoint, and this is a more public process now. Prior to this point, it was really department heads working internally, and now we have the preliminary budget that is out on the street, and for you to dive in and to go through with a fine tooth comb. So that will take us through January and February, need to finalize it in early March. In preparation for the first Monday in April for the annual town meeting. So you have the books, you also have it available online. And please go through them and some of your meeting dates and what departments you'd like to have come in, at what time, which dates. Typically, we would target the first FinCom meeting in January just to sort of do the overview. We're a little deeper than what we've done tonight, but whether that we are seeing as the big issue and things for the strategy you'd like to undertake.
Yeah, I was hoping that the second week in January, the second Thursday in January, we could have the public safety people come in.
Yep.
Since that's a big item, but the first Thursday, we'd just do the overview and then have the public safety come in that.
Thursday, that's the night of the zoning with overlay districts, the 3A. So yeah, that's being, it's a presentation. Anything?
Well, we have FinCom meetings every single Thursday. And that was scheduled through the town calendar. And we're only gonna have about 8 meetings this year. So we have to push really fast.
No, I think this one, it's in my calendar is 6 to 7. So your
Okay.
meetings usually
We
start at
start at 7, yeah.
right. Um, I think that, we need that something that most of us should try to attend, but
That's the 12th.
MBTA.
I was the 12th, correct? January 12th.
January
Yeah.
12th,
Yep.
So Greg, just on, and Sarah, just for the FinCom meetings, is this where, especially for these big, difficult discussions we're gonna have, do we have a set of towns that we benchmark against? And
The fire chief gave us something from fire towns. I believe the police chief is doing something for some towns.
so like each department head do they kind of do their own thing?
And
Or do we
Andrea-
have a list?
Andrea has some information.
I know, yeah, Andrea, I talked with Andrea and I remember you said you had some great benchmarking information. Is that something that,
I'll ask her for.
okay,
Thanks
we
for
can
that.
get, 'cause I think that's gonna be important.
There's a good, there's a good one on fire from, I know it's 6 years ago, but it's on,
No, but the police chief did something very recently, which is very eye-opening.
okay, but I'm just saying on
I mean,
fire,
fire chief, very eye-opening. Much more accurate than that long ago one.
Yeah.
really? Well, I wouldn't say accurate, but more updated, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue the one 6 years ago is accurate as of then.
And the school committee does benchmark for other towns.
I see in the materials we get at town meeting, the school committee presentation has a lot of benchmarks in there that I find very helpful. And for the town presentation this year, personally, I'd like to see more of that because I think that helps with our goal of improving transparency and explains the why and, I was just curious as to whether, because I know the benchmarking is being done, but I was curious as to whether each department head kind of picks their own towns or whether there's some, top 10 list that everybody does the same towns, or I just wasn't sure.
We do have a standard list that the department heads tend to look at others in addition.
That's fine, yeah,
And it varies because like Harbor,
right,
it's different towns.
absolutely, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, the budget length.
In terms of the public safety, I think there's a special meeting that talks about just staffing.
Yeah.
Would be appropriate.
Yes,
But have all three in
Three,
together.
yes, together.
Yes, and do that on the 12th.
so focus on staffing rather than
Yep.
just the
Yep,
overall budget. for
Yep.
this.
that's fine.
And we'll shoot to start at 7 on that one.
Yep. We have too many who work on Blossom to get here before 7.
Maybe 7:33.
No, 7 we like.
Select board doesn't everyone that works.
Hey. Don't sell yourself short.
I show up, I don't work, show up.
So that's what I had for the budget. The other topic that is on tap for tonight was to talk about animals. The second rig, whether to repair or buy new or do a different option. And so I presented some summary materials. We have Keith Cleary is on the Zoom call here. You can certainly provide an overview if that would be helpful. You tell me that we'd like to do this stuff. So just to frame it up a little bit, we currently have the frontline ambulance. It's 3 years old now. And obviously doing fine, a good rig. And the old ambulance is 12 years old, I think. And needs a new motor at a minimum. And we received an estimate to replace that motor, 15 to 20,000. The motor replacement, put a new motor in it. Additional work needed on the rig to make it roadworthy and ready to provide emergency services. So another, call it 20,000 for the motor, another 7,000 or so. Putting the radio back in and restocking it all. that sort of stuff.
Why was all the equipment pulled out of it if it hadn't been declared surplus yet?
It had been replaced.
Okay,
As far as the age, how about mileage? Like, what is the mileage on the new one and the old one? Is that? Usually you have.
Chief, did you hear that? Do you know the miles?
I believe it's somewhere around 65,000 miles on the old one. And I would have to double check. I think I did send in the new miles at one point, but I don't have that number right in front of me.
So, the different options to summarize, go ahead.
Can I just ask a technical or a mechanical question? The designation is surplus. I know we have to vote on dispensing surplus. But defining surplus, how does that happen? Because I mean, we could define this building as surplus if it wasn't organized. I'm just curious how that determination was made or
I
what.
mean,
the
we never
process
knew
is.
it was pulled out of service.
Yeah,
So it was, the chief brought that request to declare it surplus to the select board. I don't remember that date exactly. It was within the last year and a half ago, or maybe, again, maybe less than that.
Yeah, less than that.
Yeah, it was.
Months, yeah. this
Yeah, it was
board.
with this board.
I
we
saw it,
read that.
I saw it,
Yeah.
I saw it.
It's been on the panel for 5 months.
been using it since that was defined as surplus.
No, we
So it
haven't.
hasn't been used for the last almost 2 years now because of its inoperability. There was a number of efforts to repairs, efforts to try to keep it going and those efforts weren't successful, so we stopped. So again, broader context, the chief can speak to this. We tend to have a range of 60 simultaneous ambulance calls a year. So, averaging a little more than one a week. So if
And only
our
half
rig
of
doesn't respond, then we rely on mutual aid. If neighboring communities and private services that provide that, so that's what has been happening for the better part of the last 2 years.
But only half of them are transports, right? I thought
Yeah,
that
should
half
you-
of the calls were transport.
Those, how many of those calls are actual transports, Stu?
Most of them are transports. Most of the secondary calls that the out-of-town ambulance have come for have been transports. There's been very few refusals at that level. Because if they were gonna be a refusal, we would cancel them before they got here, and most of the time they got here and transported.
But aren't I correct that half the calls result in transports
In total.
in total?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the statistics, but that's probably close. I'd have to look at the actual numbers.
But yeah, it would make sense that you would turn back a
Right.
mutual aid call if someone's refusing.
Right, yeah.
And how much revenue is involved in those, half of the calls resulting in transport?
Well, we usually bring in somewhere, and Andrea could speak to this as well, our overall ambulance transports in the course of a year. The billing comes in at approximately $200,000 to $300,000 in revenue that we collect from our ambulance transports.
And how are those fees determined? Do we set them?
They go into a hospital or something.
But
They're based on a scale in the area. We are at the higher end of what we charge in comparison to the other local services.
because I've heard there's a trend of more people refusing ambulances because they don't cover, the insurances don't cover more of a percentage. And so if it's higher than what the insurance covers, I was wondering how that's set. So it's based on the average of the area. Okay.
Yeah, the different services set their own fees based on what it is, and then we have a billing company that then continually sends out, and they can be reported to the credit. So whatever is still outstanding, then the company continues to bill them and gives them the opportunity to pay it off over time, whatever wasn't covered by insurance.
And have we done a study on what it costs, like for the depreciation and labor versus the fees? Or do we lose money whenever we have an ambulance call, or do we make money? Do we know?
I don't have a metric for that. I have not calculated that. The challenge with that is that if you're trying to figure out personnel, those personnel are also cross-trained as firefighters, so it's not an exclusive all or nothing whether they go on an ambulance call, because they're still available to provide a firefighting service and a rescue service as well.
It may be imperfect, but it's a valid question to ask. If you have a service that drives revenue, you want to understand if you're making or losing money on the service. Right.
Well, public, just as a rule, just as a rule, public safety isn't in the market as a business.
Right.
It's more like insurance, that we're there for the emergencies, and it's not usually quantified as to how much it costs us to run the service versus how much to make it. It's paying for us to be available to handle those emergencies. So public service looks at it much differently than a business.
Wait a minute, Tom wants to ask the question.
The requirement for mutual aid, is that just because of the equipment, or is that also staff? Staffing as well.
Staffing as well, for sure.
No, we're not just talking about replacing the ambulance, we're also talking.
No, we're only talking about replacing the ambulance.
Yeah, just the ambulance.
There's a correlation.
There's a correlation. So what I wanted to say was, from a business standpoint, it seems to me, and this is information, I'm a rookie here, so forgive the ignorance if I have some here. My understanding is that Essex has a situation where they go on ambulance calls, the revenue goes into a separate fund. That fund turns over every 5 years and they buy their new ambulance with that.
Yes, an enterprise fund. Yes,
So that's the way they do that.
correct.
I also understand that we are one of 2 communities, I think, that have advanced life support. Is that correct?
Well, we run advanced life support. Gloucester does.
That's.
Linfield does, Middleton does,
So just. for
Topsfield does.
But that's a hot point in town.
Okay.
That it's very difficult to get rid of ALS.
Well, no, what I'm trying to say is if we're one of a few communities that have that capability, wouldn't we want to drive it more as a business entity and create revenue from that?
We're losing so much money in the fight.
I mean, just,
One at a time, please.
It's not a business.
just to build on that, I mean, I know this is dated, the report from 6 years ago, but as of that point in time, it was the data, right? And, you know, when I look at the revenue line, I see a town like Middleton that I know just came up, and they were pulling in basically twice as much. Now, maybe that's because they got 2 times as many ambulances, you know, I don't know, but even Cohasset was double us, and Cohasset really does look like us, right, both in terms of population.
No, they're double our size. Not double, but. more than half
And-
times.
And.
But I guess my point is just, those 2 towns are pulling in a lot more, and I just would be curious to why. Maybe there's an easy answer, I don't, but.
Can I offer a suggestion on that? We're running 1 ambulance. And for the last 2 years. If we knew how much we were taking in 3 years ago. When we were running 2 ambulances, we might have a better answer.
We could compare that.
Because
We have to adjust for.
I thought ambulance 2 brought in about between 30 and 40,000.
How much it cost to operate?
I would have to go back and look at that because it really hasn't been in service since I've gotten here. It was already out of service. It was not viable.
I'm
So,
arguing that it's not viable. I'm trying to find out, perhaps from Andrea. Whether there was a significant drop in revenue when we lost the second ambulance. And the other thing that I would like to say is that we have been touting our ambulance service to the town. We say we will have somebody there in about 5 minutes. That's true when we have an ambulance that's here and staffed. It is not true when we have to call in an outside service. And 5 minutes is an interesting number. Because at 7 minutes or 10 minutes, you're dead under some circumstances.
It's a valid point, and I think the conversation around the numbers is really just, we owe it to the town to understand the entire financial picture around this particular very important service, okay? Because the town has, this is something we all hear from the residents, they want the in-house ambulance, right? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have a solid understanding of whether it's generating revenue, how much revenue it's generating, in order for us to make these very expensive financial decisions about when to replace this very important infrastructure. So I think we're just kind of saying, we need a little more data. Andrea probably has it, and I think we'd like to see it.
The
I
other,
think just
Yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
the exact numbers are not going to be materially different than some good estimates. So we're bringing in, let's say we're bringing in a good year, $300,000
Okay,
of revenue on 600 calls. That's 500 a call.
so we're bringing in
So-
500.
So if you make 60 calls. At 500 a pop, that's 30,000. So again, that's not gonna be exact, but that's gonna be a ballpark.
an average, the average billing for advanced life support transport is $3,200.
Right, but that's not all, that's not what we're bringing in.
No, I'm just saying that's that's what the charge is, that we're at the upper end of what we charge for our ALS services.
Right, and not every call is an ALS call.
Right, what's a
No.
non-ALS bill?
You know, non-ALS calls are significantly lower.
Like half of that.
2,000, 2,500.
Nice.
So Greg, are you saying we net 500 per call?
And we're talking with the second ambulance is gonna be in service
I mean,
potentially just once a week.
the numbers aren't making sense to me. If we're making 3,200 per call and we do 600
Yeah,
calls.
right,
That math
So-
doesn't.
Right.
So either we're collecting on half of our calls.
That's really why we,
We're collecting about 85 to 90% of our calls.
there you go. So the numbers that we're hearing are not jiving. And so I think we'd like a little bit of an overview around this.
I'm not understanding something here.
So I know our annual income.
Right.
run ambulance is between $250,000 and $300,000.
$300,000.
Right, and
That's
there's
a no
600
number.
600 calls a year, and if you go and you don't do anything and
There's
you
no
leave,
charge.
there's no charge. And I
Correct.
think the estimate was only
Transport.
half of those is there a transport.
So you gotta
So
put in-
600, you've got 300 events where you're charging some money. And you've got $300,000, that's pretty easy math.
Well, I can get you some of the transports that we do are out of town when we go mutual aid and we're transporting patients from other towns as well. A couple of things that I need to say. First of all, having the second ambulance and being able to run it is directly related to staffing. And as far as being able to transport, because we need 2 people on it in order to transport a patient. With shift staffing of 3, when 2 are out of town on the primary ambulance, we do not often have enough people in the station to run that ambulance and transport. So we respond and start the primary care and need to call another ambulance that has 2 people to actually do the transport. The second value of a spare ambulance is when something happens to our ambulance or it needs to go out of service for maintenance. For example, we had a small accident with the mirror, the driver's side mirror on our ambulance, and it was going to be a month before we could get it into a dealership to get it fixed. So we were able to cobble the mirror together in the short term, but after about a couple days of running it that way, it was unsafe to operate the ambulance because the firefighters could not see in that mirror to pull out into traffic and had a couple of near misses. So we had to take the ambulance out of service. It was out of service 4 or 5 days before we could get it repaired. And in that time, we had to rely exclusively on mutual aid. Had it been a more serious accident or more serious damage, we would have been without an ambulance for a longer period of time.
Well, what was the accident?
It was just a mirror-to-mirror driving on the road. It was driver training on a very tight road up on Forest, and a pickup truck came the other way, and it was a narrow part of the road. And it was just a mirror-to-mirror accident. But something as small as that took our ambulance out of service for 4 days, and we didn't have a reserve. And that's the other function of a spare ambulance, is a reserve. We have, our ambulance has to go in for factory recalls coming up very soon. And we don't have a spare to replace it when it goes out of service. So these are additional concerns of the value of a second ambulance, not just to be available if we have sufficient staffing to run second ambulance calls.
So at this point, though, you're saying, okay, so if we get the second ambulance, that then unless you have more staffing, the second ambulance is simply backup.
Yes,
Would you send an ambulance out with 1 person?
no,
Okay, because that would eliminate transport, but that doesn't necessarily eliminate treatment.
no, but we have the ability to treat, and we looking at converting one of our vehicles into an ALS non-transporting ambulance.
Would
In
that
the
go out with 1
interim.
person? Would that go out with 1 person?
That would go out with 1 person.
That's informative.
So that would be a stopgap
That's right.
to waiting for the second ambulance. If we ordered and purchased the second one, that would give us increased capability, but still wouldn't give us secondary transport capability.
Understood. Right. Which happens half the time.
30 times a year.
Well,
half a half.
60%, 60 calls, 60 to 70 calls a year, we have simultaneous calls that the ambulance can only go to one of. And then the other one, we rely on mutual aid.
So back on the conversation about the buy or repair decision we're confronting here. But I haven't
Yes.
heard anybody say that we don't want 2 ambulances, so I just
Mhm.
focus on the discussion here. It's the ambulance in question that's out of service. It
Yes,
has roughly 60-ish thousand miles on it.
Yeah.
Is there any rust or, you know, is it, if, I guess what I'm asking is if we make a repair to it, which that would give us a second ambulance pretty fast, what would its useful life then be? Because 60,000 is nothing, you know,
Mhm.
that's pretty light when it comes to mileage, right?
So it's
Especially
getting
for
a new
vehicles
motor.
indoors.
I'm sorry?
It needs a new motor. So
Right.
that's what's replacing.
Well,
Okay.
it needs a new motor and it needs a new stretcher system.
Well, let's talk about the motor, just, I mean, just the vehicle itself.
Yeah, I mean, it could be viable with a new motor. He said it had a lot of bad codes. That's the primary reason it was taken out of service, because the motor could not be fixed to make it reliable. And that's what we're really looking for. A reliable second ambulance.
Right, so I guess from my perspective, because I've never given away a car that's less than 150,000 miles, you know, so I'm one of those that pushes the limit here a little bit. So I'm trying to understand replacing the motor, okay?
Yes.
How much, then when would we need to replace the ambulance? How long
Well-
do we extend its useful life for?
So what had happened to this is this ambulance ran 10 years first due. And which is way too long for it to run first due. It should have been put in reserve sooner and then rotated in for a couple of years. And that's why I instituted trying to get the ambulance on the factory recommended or the industry recommended 5-year replacement plan. Because
Okay,
you
but
want
it's
it
not
reliable and you
Not
rely.
answering my question, Chief. Chief, I just have a really specific question.
Sure.
If we invest some, let's
20
say
20,000.
93, whatever,
Yeah.
dollars to replace the motor, all those other parts that these vehicles have, you know, to get it in the best possible running shape it can be, then how long are we extending its life for? Is it 5 years? Is it 3 years? Is it,
Well, I think the
what is the
expectation
expectation?
the expectation is if you're gonna replace ambulance number one on a 7-year cycle, then that is 3 years old now. So 4 years from now, you wouldn't need.
That's really not my question. My question is the vehicle that we're talking about potentially
We're talking
replacing.
about getting 4 years out of it based
We
on this
can't.
rotation. That's what the presumption is.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if we do a repair, we can get it back on track so we can do the road
Or we modify the squad
or the
engine.
squad engine.
You
Okay.
don't need another staff member to run it,
Right,
Mhm.
right.
and it doesn't cost you much.
But you still,
But the goal is still to replace ambulance one every 5 years and then move that into a reserve status. So we know,
I don't
Or
think
7. If you look at the repair record, it makes no sense to replace them every 5 years.
or 7.
I've heard that, ambulance, useful life is about 250,000 miles. Do you agree with that? I mean, I've read it in a couple of places.
I don't, some services have to get that much miles out of their vehicles, especially you see that in private services. You do not see that in fire-based EMS. I'm not aware of fire departments that run ambulances over 100,000 miles. Unless there's some critical shortage or something, and that's why you're seeing a lot of people running them now because of the 2 years wait for new ambulances.
Do
So
we?
they can't not run them if they need them.
Do we have the history on how frequently we replaced all of our prior ambulances?
Very good
No.
question.
Yeah, there was no plan to replace them, and that's why we're in this situation that we are.
I'm not
Yeah.
asking for a plan, I'm asking what we actually did in
I would think the
reality.
town would have that.
I only have them going back to one ambulance ago. And that was probably a 2000, I believe. So they ran that for 10 years before they bought the current ambulance 2, which is our spare, and then ran that for 10 years.
I thought we were on a 10-year cycle.
Andy, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, to me, it seems kind of, how do you have a conversation about a backup ambulance that then demands that you have 4 people staffed at any given moment
Right.
when you don't actually have that staffing? And while I understand, it's a critical service, just like, the pump trucks and the ladder trucks are critical services, but we don't have backups for those. So.
We do, but we should, maybe not the ladder, but we need one for the engine. The squad is not a sufficient backup for the engine. And we run into the same problem
To
when
answer
the
your question,
engine
the way I
has a
look at
problem.
it, The only
Excuse me?
point is, like the chief said, you would spend 20 grand, let's just say, on a new engine for ambulance 2.
Yeah.
But the only value you're getting out of that is when ambulance 1 needs to get a mirror fixed or an oil change. At
Yeah.
least you've got.
Yeah.
That's the only value. You wouldn't,
That
to your
is-
point, you wouldn't be able to run two concurrently.
We're not running-
because
we're not
you
running
don't
two.
have-
The only way we would do that is if on a call, we had somebody else come back on recall because the ambulance was out on a call and somebody came back off duty, which occasionally they do. It's not a high number of times, but there are times when we end up with 2 people still in the station to handle a second call.
The question I have is, we've gone 2 years now with one ambulance.
Yes.
Are we still hitting those 5 to 8 minute, what's the timeframes on those?
Response time?
There you go, there's a word.
Well,
Response time.
When we have the ambulance staffed, it's certainly making it to the call. If we have 2 people on duty and the ambulance goes out of town, then nobody is in the station to respond to the second call, and you usually get one of the Manchester police officers responding, and dispatch calls the mutual aid ambulance. If we have 3 on duty, then the person remaining at the station responds and starts care and waits for a mutual aid ambulance. With the current draw on mutual aid ambulances in Essex County and nationwide, it can be 15 to 20 minutes for the actual transporting ambulance to arrive.
So I
Greg,
think he's
I have a
asking,
suggestion. It seems to me that if a second ambulance requires staffing, that we should wait and decide what to do with the ambulance until we've had the staffing discussion. Does that make sense?
You can certainly do that.
Unless you want to talk about it truly as a true backup, like,
Backup.
you spend the 20 grand, it's just sitting there, so when that mirror gets fixed or the.
Or is it cheaper to
it's
modify the
changed.
squad?
Right, right,
Mhm.
like what are the dollars to modify?
The dollar to modify the squad is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $7,500.
Okay.
Yeah, the number we have here is 62 to 72,000 per year.
See, I don't understand, I wasn't understanding those annual dollars.
Yeah.
That was, Greg could probably speak to those.
On the assumption that a new ambulance is 430 to 500,000, that's the range. So if it's a 5-year cycle, well, so in number 1, the 2 ambulances, total cost of 860 to $1 million over 10 years, amortized 86 to 100,000 a year. And number 2, stretched it over 14 years, so that same figure, 860 to $1 million, amortized over 14 years. That gives you your 62 to 72,000 a year. Number 3, we only have 1 ambulance lasting 7 years. So that's why I have that 62 to 72.
So I'm not saying that math isn't good for certain kind of accounting depreciation,
Right.
but from a pure cash, here and now standpoint, it sounds like the answer is $5 grand to 7,500.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't, that's a separate. number.
And then we
I
don't.
was just trying to show the.
We're not hitting ourselves into a corner.
Yeah, that's a
Staff.
Okay, 1 person at a time so that the people who are transcribing can do so, please.
Okay, what I just said was that if we go with modifying the squad, we don't paint ourselves into a corner.
Right.
As far as staffing goes.
there doesn't seem to be a downside
Right,
to
exactly.
repairing the squad, getting something in service ASAP that
Right.
can benefit the town. And
No.
we could still debate what we do about the ambulance when we have the staffing discussion, but I just don't see a downside to,
especially since the dollars are so short.
With the
Which
squad,
It's short
the
money.
squad or the repairing the ambulance?
I'm just talking the squad.
Squad.
That's,
Yeah,
it's a
that's-
cheap option to get something in service for our residents
I don't know.
ASAP.
Do we have a time frame?
And
How
we
long
still
would it
have
take
time to talk about it.
Why-
Could it fit a stretcher? Could a squad car fit the stretcher?
No, not for transport.
So no
Yeah. So
transfer.
you don't, you don't have to spend that money.
Just to go.
All it is sending a paramedic with the paramedic supplies to initiate treatment quickly.
So the 5 to 7 grand is just putting paramedic equipment in this.
Yeah, it's cabinetry and shelving and air conditioning and the compartmentalization we need to convert the squad from being more of a firefighting apparatus to more of an EMS vehicle.
So in terms of time it would take to get that done, sounds like very short. So
Yeah, I mean, we would have to have the custom cabinets made. We'd have to have it send it out, have it fitted and things like
What
that.
is the time frame?
I don't know. I would have to get estimates. I don't know what the companies, there are several different companies. We probably have to see who had the better deal, how far we needed to take it. There are several different companies that do those type of conversions.
What is the squad car? Is that an SUV? What is it?
No,
No, it's a mini pumper. The challenge with that is it doesn't really function well as a mini pumper for us, and primarily all it does is follow the ambulance, the calls now.
So
Um,
it's going there anyway.
It's going anyway.
well, yeah, it was going anyway. The other thing was, and this is another option, is because I don't want to get off the ambulance topic, but it's part of a larger vehicle staffing. Our frontline engine is 12 years old. It's the perfect time for it to go in reserve and get a new frontline engine. We do have an offer from a fire apparatus broker to purchase our squad. So that money could be used towards purchasing a new frontline engine. Because right now the squad is supposed to be a spare to our frontline engine, but it doesn't compare. It's not even close in comparison with respect to capabilities that we need.
So may I ask, so, excuse me, so if we convert the squad, so we can get an EMT, And-
paramedic.
a paramedic,
Yeah.
paramedic,
One paramedic.
one paramedic, and he can start, okay, until a mutual aid.
Late ambulance, yes.
Okay, we're not compromising, well, a little bit, but we're stabilizing the patient until the
Yeah.
ambulance.
I mean, we go and stabilize the patient now. We just can't do it at the ALS level. But this would allow us to do it at the advanced life support level.
And we're foregoing any opportunity for revenue on a transport.
Correct.
What is the offer for the squad? at this-
$175,000.
And what would a replacement first line engine be?
700,000.
Okay,
But consider that, but you need to,
Our conversation.
no, but you need to consider, we have $1.1 million in the fire apparatus replacement fund that's specifically to replace an engine or an ambulance or both. And that's why that fund has been built up for times like this. If the town doesn't have the interest in a lease purchase or anything like that, and to buy outright, that's where that $1.1 million would go, to a new ambulance and a new frontline engine.
I don't see it in the capital plan that's been submitted to us. I was gonna ask, is that in the capital plan?
It's not in the capital plan because I've been trying to get some feedback as to the appetite for my replacement plan. So I didn't put it in the capital because there are other capital needs I know that we have to do that don't require this much discussion. But I have submitted a couple different apparatus replacement plans with the explanation of which apparatus, which year, and for which reason.
So let me ask you this.
Yes,
If we look at the sale of the squad vehicle,
mhm.
and that money going,
He wasn't talking about selling the squad. He was talking about selling engine number one.
No, selling the squad.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
so if you're talking about selling squad for 120,000,
75.
75.
175, thank
Yep.
you.
You welcome.
And then you repair the old rig, including the new striker lift, for 62 to 7, about 95, I think it was. We get about 4 more years out of that. Can you still run that as with one person as you would do the
No.
squad engine, so it's a but functioning as a non-transport, if it's a backup.
No, because it'd be licensed as a transporting ambulance and would require 2 EMTs to run it.
So you,
So when you say EMTs, can it be an EMT and a paramedic?
Yes, it could.
So it could be a police officer.
So it could be a police officer.
Yeah, I mean, that gets into cross-staffing and pulling them off their job again, which I'd want to explore with the police chief. I know that was done in the past.
But that's,
That's an
But
option.
but
That's an
Becky,
option.
your comment is an interesting one, is that you sell the squad which is already perhaps not appropriate. We gather some revenue from that. You get the ambulance up as a functioning, transporting backup piece of equipment. That when the mirror falls off the first one or whatever else happens, you have the second one to use. And we maybe get 4 years out of that and deflect a 400K
mhm.
purchase. When you look at all that, that kind of makes an awful lot of sense.
It does.
So we just put $400,000 back in the coffers.
Well, we can, I mean, we voted on it, so the question is, does that go to reserves or what does that happen?
Yeah, trickle down.
Okay,
Go back to the vehicle.
I just throw one thing on top of that. We don't know, I don't know, maybe someone knows the timing of all that, but like, let's just say that the timing of, selling the squad and all that stuff is more, I don't know, call it medium termish, just right? It sounds to me like in the really short term, given the small dollars, you'd still,
fix the ambulance.
right? No, throw the $5,000 into the squad, just so that,
But then the person might not want to buy it.
That's a good question, though. If we throw the short money to upgrade the squad, can we still sell it for the 175, or does that negate the interest from the other
I
party?
think I'm within a month of when their offer for the squad expires. They gave me a 6-month offer, a 6-month window of selling the squad for 175,000 based on the miles and the condition it was in when I sent them the information. But it's coming very close to the expiration of that offer. And I don't know if they would want it if we modified it in any way.
If
Because
we
that's
modify it, how
Make
many
it
more
better?
years do you get out of the squad if it's modified?
Oh, let's see, it's a 2018. 4. Another 15, but it's not serving the function that it was purchased for.
Understood. I mean,
So
that's a
I
lot.
wouldn't, I personally wouldn't keep it another 15. It doesn't do nearly what it needs to do as a backup for engine 1. So I would always be looking to offload it in order to get another full-size engine.
So that vehicle wasn't purchased as a backup to engine 1. We had a different philosophy with a different chief.
Well, from what I've heard, it was designed to be both a mini pumper and a brush truck, and it is not viable as a brush truck. So it never served that particular function. And it never really runs other than to chase the ambulance, because it's not an equivalent to engine 1 when engine 1's out of service. And we don't have enough on-duty staffing to run it in conjunction with the other engine to make it viable in that respect. So operationally, it does not serve a really good function.
Oh, let's not go there.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean,
So
It's a third person to help, but
in an entire different vehicle, for what?
that's the,
but
like.
but allows them to get back to another call.
Today, there was an ambulance that went by Bridge Street and the engine 1 was behind it.
Is because you can't put 3 in the one vehicle, so you need a 2-in-1, or it's
Well,
more the flexibility.
The
so that-
flexibility.
Okay.
It's the flexibility for that other person to break off for the second call of the other emergency.
That's,
Can we make a decision or?
I would give some serious consideration to selling the squad,
Mhm.
taking the revenue from the squad, banking it for other stuff.
Mhm.
Fixing the second ambulance as a backup and
Mhm.
deflecting, spending 400K on a new ambulance as for as long as we can.
Yeah. That's what I'm leaning toward.
And the second ambulance can be transported with a police officer.
Yes.
Right.
With a
with a paramedic, with a
Paramedic.
EMT.
Paramedic.
Yeah,
fire, paramedic, and
And
police
police
EMT, all of our police officers are EMTs,
So then you got your cake and eat it too.
right?
I'm good.
I'm good with that.
And we have, apparently we have a month timeframe to make this decision. Or we lose the sale of it, so that's,
Chief, do you know the exact date that the offer expires?
I have the paperwork back on my desk. I don't have it with me tonight.
Do you happen, I mean, is it before the end of this calendar year?
I would have to go back and honestly double check. I know I've had the offer in for probably 2 or 3 months now.
Did we declare this for surplus?
I'm sorry.
No,
Didn't we? I thought we did.
There's
no,
something.
it was the ambulance.
Is the ambulance.
Ambulance 2 is declared surplus.
Okay, thank you.
So before we sell it, I'm not even sure why we had it out for sale if we didn't consider it service, surplus.
I think the chief was exploring options that, to see what might be possible.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Mhm.
I suggest that if we're going that way, we should declare it surplus.
No, I know, absolutely, you would have to before you. So,
Yeah, that's not-
Maury, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was gonna say it's up to you. But I think one possibility would be to call one thing surplus and bring another thing from surplus back to active.
Right.
Bring the ambulance back to active and declare the pumper or
The
Yeah.
squad.
squad, make it surplus and sellable. But
What is the time frame for repairing the ambulance too?
chief needs to get more details on that.
Yeah, it was, all I was able to get was estimate, just an estimate on a cost for a motor replacement, and the other costs I was already aware of. But I don't have a time frame, don't have a commitment, don't have a,
Was that from Coastal Auto Repair? Is that?
No.
It was from.
no, it was from, I called several different dealers, and most dealers would not put a new motor in ambulance 2.
One on the South Shore or something.
They would not do it.
Randolph.
No. Regardless.
Regardless of the quote?
Yeah, they wouldn't even quote it. I called 2 or 3, 4 dealerships, and 2 of them said they didn't have a motor and that would fit that the way it was supposed to, and they did not want to undertake retrofitting it.
Cause it just seems like there's obviously so many Ford dealerships between here and Rodman Ford down in Foxborough. It's just strange.
Yeah, no, most of them wouldn't even touch it. They didn't even want to have a discussion on it. That E450 motor and the ability to work on those short nose cabs makes it extremely costly and extremely difficult.
I'm just curious, but was Kelly Ford, was that one of the ones you called around here?
I called, yes, I called Kelly, I called Colonial. Some didn't even call me back.
Well, but Kelly was one of the ones that said no, or they?
I believe so. Either that or they didn't call me back. I left messages with the service managers and explained them and called back.
Gets back to you.
I'll double check. I have the list back in my office as to who I called. And I called some other aftermarket places that deal with vehicle motors and truck motors, independent of Ford dealerships.
No, we're just chugging a little. I think most of us here have a kind of high level personal contact with someone at Kelly Ford, so.
Who wants to contact?
I'll text them.
I find it hard to believe that they would explore.
Like, usually like when you get work done in your house, there's always that like, I don't really want to do the work price, like you always get a quote, it's just sometimes.
Yeah, no, literally, and people are dumping these ambulances left and right. Just because that was not a good design, not a good motor, and not a good vehicle to work on by Ford. So those E450s are all disappearing.
Say it again, Brian. I'm sorry.
It just seems kind of incomprehensible that there's a common vehicle type like the F-450 that is somehow determined to be unserviceable and unrepairable and nobody will. put a
Yeah,
motor in it.
it's very hard to believe.
Yeah, I don't get it.
And my mechanic friend doesn't.
Well, it's a Ford 6.0, and all you have to do is mention to a mechanic that you want him to work on a Ford 6.0 and an E450, and they all but hang up the phone on you. I've gotten the I'm not a mechanic, but that's the response I got from everybody. And anybody that was running those ambulances have made sure to get rid of them because of that motor.
It's 9:15. And where do we want to go at this point?
I have one question. Given that particular scenario and independent of any staffing changes, there've been discussions with Chief Fitzgerald about, because it's really dependent upon a police
No.
officer being
That
involved.
has not been part of a staffing plan or any discussion I've had with respect to staffing second ambulances.
We'll let that ride for a month.
If we let it ride for a month, then maybe we can't sell the squad.
Right.
No, I'm just saying this, the staffing is being discussed on January 17th. We don't need to discuss it tonight.
Right, I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out how we can quickly get the level of medical service that we have more or less promised the town. How, and quickly, if repairing ambulance 2 can be done in a couple of months, maybe that's okay. But if it's gonna take 6 months,
Right.
then I'm not so happy about selling Squad 2. If we can get that online in a couple of weeks or a month.
Well, I
Maybe
don't
we
think, I
can
don't,
list out options, our preference for options, and then hopefully the chief can get some quick answers on the time frame, because I think that's the missing piece to your point, and it's
Sure.
tough for us to make a firm decision without the repair timeframes.
And when the offer for the squad car
Right,
drops
exactly.
dead
Yep.
and
So that's, we do need some more information, I feel.
But could we make a decision pending, give them some boundaries, saying our first for example, our first preference would be to repair the ambulance
don't-
and sell the squad if it could be repaired in a certain time frame, or
I
we
think
can't
we
do
need
that.
to, I think to make a proper decision, we need to have the information and make one decision. I'm not comfortable. I don't know about anybody else.
Oh, I think it makes sense. So to me, the 2 data points in terms of time is, number one, ask Rodman Ford when they could replace the engine, since they're the only ones that came back with a quote. Obviously, we can try to reach out to other deals, there you go. And then the other timing question is on the adding the, whatever, $5,000 of equipment, to the squad, right?
Or the expiration of selling.
That's the
And
key
the
date.
expiration, yeah.
That's the key date
So-
choice.
What's those 3 dates?
I have one more question though, that Chief, you were saying that if you do the ambulance, fit it out with the, upgraded striker stretcher,
Yes,
that it has to be an ALS? Is there any way to repair the ambulance for use as the squad would be without being a transport?
you would have to take the stretcher out. You would have to license it as a non-transporting, and you couldn't transport it.
And maybe we do that in the interim until we figure out what staffing is.
I would have to double check on how that would be able to be licensed, or what the different requirements would be for the state of taking an actual ambulance, which would be a transporting ambulance, and making it a class 5 non-transporting. I don't know what OEMS requires for one and for the other, and if it depends on the style of the vehicle.
I think we need
Or not.
that information as well, because we can't make a decision based upon not actual staffing.
Mhm.
I think we can.
You think so?
Yes,
well, and under the concept of just having a backup ambulance.
yes.
Okay,
And-
all right,
And
It
the
wouldn't preclude the
Yep.
continued conversation about staffing, but
correct,
we could make a quick decision, to Ann's point, to get something operational fast.
correct. Yep, okay.
Otherwise, I think
Could I ask a question? Just because we haven't gone down this road before with new apparatus purchases. But with respect to having an apparatus replacement fund and coming up with industry standards proposals on how much or when apparatus should be replaced and how much it costs. What is the process of getting that money that's already been put aside for these purposes, approved for these purposes?
Has to
What-
go through town meeting. Requires an appropriation by town meeting. It requires to be in the budget. It's gotta go through the budget.
Right, but I guess I'm asking what presentation or what do you need to know or hear from me that encourages you to free up that money to put it on the town meeting to be voted for in order to get those vehicles replaced?
Part of your capital plan, chief, that gets approved by the.
Okay. Fair enough. I just want to learn the mechanism, that's all. Thank
So I
you.
think just to add on to what Greg said, the standards that you refer to, chief, I've only heard tonight timeframes. Those standards probably include other things like mileage, right?
And repair history.
Repair history. I mean, there's other factors besides timeframes, so that.
Not according to the NFPA. The NFPA.
No, but there's what, so maybe
Right.
they're not articulating it as a requirement, but they're making an assumption. When they say 5-year replacement, they are making an underlying assumption about how many miles are on that ambulance within 5 years. That's the number I don't have
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's how they work because all our gear and all our equipment is governed the same way on primarily on timeframes. And
I
that,
understand, because utilization is an important metric, and if it's not explicitly stated, it is an assumption. And when you're, all those great standards, which are terrific, right?
Mhm.
But when you apply them to a tiny organization, not even a small organization, a tiny organization, you got to dig at least 1 or 2 levels deeper to understand the underlying assumptions that those standards are based on.
Yep.
And that's a missing piece of this puzzle, and it's why we're having so many questions and why we have this conversation.
5 and 5 might be appropriate for Somerville.
Might be
but-
Boston.
Manchester, right,
But not
This was like
Manchester.
A lot of road work.
Okay, so I think that,
Could we just make a list of what we're asking for? Or maybe Greg has the list.
Greg always has
And
a
the
list.
action item that we're gonna add to our tracker for the information that is requested, but also by when we expect to get it back and which meeting we can review it.
So I would aim for your January 3rd meeting.
Yeah, sounds good.
So the 3 dates, there's a timeline. The question about could the old ambulance be repaired and licensed as a non-transport ambulance? Those are the 4 key pieces of information. And then if we can drill down deeper into the standards, how were they built? What assumptions underlie those standards that the PA has promulgated?
And the 3 key dates are when the offer,
When the offer expires on the squad, when could the engine,
how long would it take?
when can the old ambulance be put back on the road? And how quickly could the squad be retrofitted?
Thank you, that's exactly
Yep,
what
that's
I.
exactly right.
If somebody would be able to record those and email them to me, I would appreciate it, and then I can answer them kind.
I'll get them to you.
Great, thank you.
Maybe one more sub is just the theoretical question. If we were to spend that 5 or 7 grand to equip squad,
Does it impact?
does
the quote?
it plus, minus, or neutral? Does
Yeah.
it have any impact on
Yeah.
the offer, right?
Okay,
I think one other question is, if the offer goes away, are there other people who might line up to purchase a squad?
Excellent question.
Well, that was-
Presumably,
the
yes.
guy would
Extend
offer us
their period of.
He might revise his offer based
Yeah.
on 6 months later. I mean, that doesn't have a lot of miles in that 6 months.
Are the brokers the best pathway for such equipment? strikes me that a broker that you might just reach out and contact is gonna give you. It's probably worth a lot more than 175, I guess is where I'm thinking.
So it's that same, the age old question, you try to sell it yourself or do you go, you wholesale it?
Yeah.
It's,
Craigslist.
Put it on Craigslist, yeah. You can take the phone calls.
So this is a broker with the 175 off?
I believe so, right, chief? That was through, a dealer.
It's a nationwide dealer in used fire apparatus.
So that dealer clearly's got the other side of the transaction already. So how big a spread is that guy? Yeah.
A lot of money.
Certainly could be.
It's about $70,000 less than we paid for it in 2018.
Oh,
Should sell everything.
Not as bad as I thought.
Yeah, but
It's like blowing out a business sale.
it's a good market for selling, because people can't get equipment.
Okay,
Okay.
do we have anything else then to discuss this evening?
You pass those
All right.
brownies around again.
Oh, yeah, brownie.
Not hearing any others, do I have a motion from the?
So moved. Move
Second.
to adjourn.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Brian Solacey, roll call vote, Ann Harrison,
Yes.
John Round.
Yes.
Kathy Bellata.
Yes.
Brian Solacey.
Yes.
Becky Jake says yes, that's a wrap.
Do I have a motion to adjourn from the finance committee?
Make
Mike
the
Pratt,
motion.
2 seconds, Andy seconds. Roll call vote, Mike,
Yeah.
Andy.
Yes.
Maury,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Dean.
Yeah.
Sarah says yes.
Well done, thank you. Good night, Chief.
Thank you.
It's already gone.
Enjoy your holidays, folks.
Yes, happy.